The episode begins with a scene involving a boy and a slightly older girl, probably brother and sister. She cries that her brother, Kakeru, should forgive her, and an angel-like figure appears before her. A chain emanates from the angel to kill the brother and the girl. A younger sister of the same gender lived to see her family's murder. This is where we advise that viewers' discretion is advised. What a gloomy, bloody spectacle. Hope this story gets good. We're then taken to a scene where a red-haired lady seems to be chanting or praying. I wouldn't know how religious stuff works and a fire erupts. Within the fire is a woman. The wind blows the environment, causing the red-haired girl to be slashed on various sides. After the wind blows out the fire, she sees a blood-filled inscription on her arm and asks if it means that person is here. Whenever a story starts with saying that person, I fear that we'll see a lot of cliches. Nevertheless, the story goes off with high mysteries. Following this scene, we move into a routine serene school scene. But even this scene at school is not typical at all. During the day, a guy wears an eye patch over one of his eyes and seems to be watching the moon, which surprisingly appears during the day. Immediately, we get our first fan service scene. The girl's panties blaze into the screen with no apologies needed. The female in concern says how she hates how it's windy. We find out that she's Yuka, and our boy is Kakeru, the guy from the beginning. Yuka has been looking for them for a while. She asks what he's looking at, and he points at the moon. Hence, we get the protagonist's narrated backstory. The two were raised in an institution. Kakeru had been alone since his sister, his only family member, took her life some years back. Yuka was the only person who might have supported him at that time. Yuka took care of Kakeru for several years after being adopted by a kind family. These two seem like good friends. I wonder if it'll go in the lovey-dovey direction. Meanwhile, there is a person observing Kakeru and Yuka from a distance as they are conversing, but the scene keeps its usual cool as Kakeru and Yuka go home from school with two of their classmates. We get a few panty scenes and some filler talk from the new duo, Tadashi and Tori. Despite his extreme quietness and lack of conversation, Kakeru and Yuka have a few incredibly animated and charming pals. When Yuka's friends invite Yuka and Kakeru to go to the mall, they decline since Kakeru feels uncomfortable around large crowds. However, a little while later, Kakeru understands that Yuka truly wants to go to the mall, so he accompanies her there. What a nice guy. Well, let's get to the good part, where the anime once more deviates into darkness. They are on their way to the mall when Yuka keeps chuckling at happiness. Yuka makes the cringe move of stretching his hands to her, and she reaches for it. That's when it all begins. All surrounding Yuka and Kakeru suddenly becomes red and displays static. They are in physical pain as a result of the changes in their world. Everything goes dark crimson and black, shattering the glass of their reality, bringing them into another realm and giving them the impression that they are somewhere else. Except for them, everyone has vanished and the moon is now completely black in this dimension. Also, the time is 4:09 p.m. Good to know. They check for everyone and see no one in Yuka's home. Kakeru glances at a dark figure passing by the window, and he convinces Yuka that something dangerous is in this world with them. Kakeru is correct when she warns of the danger. As they rush to school, monstrous creatures ambush them out of nowhere. All of a sudden, reality's glass breaks and everything goes back to normal. Everything appears to be back to normal, and nobody else appears to be aware of the incident. After returning home, Kakeru and Yuka find it difficult to sleep due to what occurred to them. Kakeru sees himself in a red-black world with the city in flames anytime he closes his eyes, which is another source of nightmares for him. He is quickly woken by Yuka. Well, Yuka thinks Kakeru slept rather well amidst it all. But the next morning, a guy who looks like Inuyasha and a nerdy-looking girl cross paths at the beginning of school. The girl asks the Inuyasha guy if he still remembers. He ignores and she runs after him. Meanwhile, everything is back to normal, so Yuka and Kakeru attend school together as usual. Regardless, they still think of the incident. Kakeru vows to protect Yuka when things happen again. The bell rings, and they run into the school hall for classes. However, there's a female figure surrounded by dark shadows, watching them from within the bushes, showing that something's wrong. The teacher introduces the class to the new exchange student, Momono Shiori. Since Shiori comes from Italy, she is well liked by the students. She, however, doesn't bother to involve herself with the class. She tells them not to interfere with her life because she doesn't have any peculiar interest in them. Shiori does, however, show interest in Kakeru. She approaches Kakeru and Yuka, who were wondering why. Yuka faints from something regarding Shiori, so Kakeru takes her in his arms to the school clinic so that she can get better. Yuka is embarrassed, but Kakeru doesn't care. At the entrance of the clinic, Inuyasha guy comes out and tells them both to move out of the way. Kakeru challenges Miss Too Cool for School that she's sick, and he smirks, pushing them out of the way. Once Yuka comes into play, we get a quick fan service scene for no reason at all, and then we're told that Yuka has anemia. She is told to sleep until school is out. The nurse asks Kakeru when he wore the eye patch, and he replies that it's been since birth and immediately excuses himself. Meanwhile, the red-haired girl is on the roof, and from her visual perspective, things seem to have a shade of red as usual. Kakeru and Yuka stroll home together after school and make a stop at the shopping center. Because of what transpired yesterday, they chose to take a different route and didn't proceed in the same manner as they did yesterday. Throughout their shopping, they had lots of fun. Afterward, they relax in the great outdoors and take a drink while basking in the day's glory. Shiori secretly follows them the entire time. They are unperturbed by this though and are able to spend a lovely day outdoors in the lovely weather. Yuka proposes that Kakeru rests his head on her lap, and they both wish it lasts forever. But things go south when they see the girl with the shadowy aura. The lovely private moment between them insidiously changes as the Crimson Knight returns, and they witness a sinister apparition of Kukuri, Kakeru's sister, the shadowy figure. Then, Yuka and Kakeru are surrounded by monsters once more, and something that resembles a mecha machine observes the attacks and wonders who the boy is. Kakeru fights the monsters with a metal pipe, while one of them gradually uses its tentacles to bring Yuka to its clutches. Kakeru tries to save her. I'm impressed by how the creators could chip in fan service within this scene of monsters surrounding Kakeru and Yuka. The orange-haired girl appears to save them from certain death by vanquishing all beasts surrounding them with a lightning sword. They thank her and ask her what her name is. She urges them to follow her to safety, but they are halted by an odd sound. Meanwhile, a girl begs for help inside a crystal. The orange-haired girl reveals she's from the same school as them and that she's Misuzu Kusaka, a third-year student at Niji High. She also tells them that it was someone who constructed the parallel universe, and they were chosen to come here due to their unique powers. They are urged to investigate the alternate dimension, but one of the Mechamonster's arch-minions arrives and stops them from proceeding. Misuzu defends the two and tells them to run. Misuzu eventually teleports herself to the inner portion of the other dimension using a magic spell on Nvidia, the minion, where they discover a maiden with white hair trapped in a crystal. The maiden, later identified as Licit, informs them that she is being controlled against her will. Misuzu warns Kakeru not to fall for her charming voice, as there is a subconscious force causing her to ruin the entire place. The boss and his minions show up in the same room as Yuka, asking Misuzu to relieve Lizette of her misery. When Misuzu tries to use her magic, it fails, and the boss orders Nvidia to destroy Kakeru and prevent them from continuing to exist. Meanwhile, in the real dimension, the nurse, who dresses in no small manner away from any school protocols, gets a drink from Inuyasha Boy, who comes into the clinic with a bloodied side and lies on the bed. We see that Kakeru, Yuka, and Misuzu are suddenly transported back to the real world. After returning to reality, Kakeru and the two girls stop at a cafe to discuss their recent experiences. She explains that the demons they encountered are unlike the demons waiting in the dark. Instead, they're ghosts, as they do not exist in this realm. She reveals that the other three students were battling demons similar to her own, and she tells them about the other three students she discovered in the Crimson Knight alongside her. Kakeru is asked by Misuzu to remove his eye patch, and when he does, we notice that he has a yellow eye in contrast to his uncovered blue counterpart. She feels a sensation and asks if Yuka feels it too. Yuka denies, so Misuzu instructs him to put his patch back on later that night. While walking through the streets with Yuka, Kakeru is seen reflecting on his secret ability. Yuka and Kakeru discuss the incident and what it means for their lives. Yuka becomes shy and begs Kakeru to stay by her side forever. Kakeru swears to support her no matter what. Yuka hugs him, and Kakeru remembers the demon head, making his hands tremble. For someone who's trying to protect a girl, he does act like a wimp. Fortunately, Kori and Tadashi, their other friends, were just in the nick of time to save him from fate. Kakeru returns to see Momono, whom he initially remembers as his deceased sister, but later realizes she is Momono. She stares at Kakeru once again. After that confrontation, Kakeru walks in and Yuka walks into a store with Yuka and Yukiko Hirohara, who introduce themselves as a receptionist. In a display of amazing plot convenience, Yukiko heals a wound on her hand that seemed not to have healed before. As it gets dark, Kakeru and his companion head home. Yuka gives Kakeru a hug and expresses her hope for their future together, but Kakeru is too preoccupied with his power. At night, Kakeru receives visions of the Knight of a Throne, an armor for the arm, and people placing their hands on the armor. He wakes early the next morning and finds a strange book in the library, which he reads to his sister. He picks the book from the rack and sees his sister on the other side. He runs to the other side. However, the ghost has vanished, but he sees a note on the floor. When he saw the note, his covered eye began to hurt. The note informs him that he was the one who called the demon. Kakaro, Yuka, and Misuzu go outside their classroom to check out the black moon that just formed in the sky. Kakaru asks for an explanation, but Misuzu still doesn't have an answer. They quickly get back into an empty hallway to talk. Misuzu tells them to come meet her in the school if they happen to get in the alternate dimension again. Kakaru tells Misuzu that he wants to talk with her, and she says he should meet her in her classroom by lunch break. When she leaves, Yuka asks Kakaru, but he says it's nothing. In class, Kakaru gets lost in his thoughts and is called back to order. The teacher urges him to keep his thoughts in class. He later meets Misuzu to train him, but she refuses. Meanwhile, Yukiko meets with Yuka and plays around with her and her snacks. Yuka senses a thing between Yukiko and Inuyasha Boy, so she asks if Yuko has feelings for Takahisa, but Yuko tells him there's no such thing between them. She believes he's in pain as she is. We afterward move to a perverted scene, which would better not be said. We don't get demonetized, do we? Tadashi becomes the school librarian, so she punishes Tori for his perverse thoughts. Kakaru trains in the school year while Misuzu eventually decides to train him in the way of the sword. Tadashi watches them from a distance. She decides to tell Kakaru a thing or two about swordsmanship. She takes them to her settlement on the city's outskirts, where she learns foreign techniques and acquires all 5 treasured swords. She summons the swords and shows them to Yuka and Kakaru. Misuzu mentions that she fought challengers from different bloodlines to get her hands on these swords, but she gets chased out of the village as it's taboo for just one person to own all 5 swords. This made the elders seek revenge against her, so she fled her locality and came to her mother's house to rest and avoid confrontation. Kakaru keeps training his sword slashes by slashing through the flames of a lit candle. He does till nightfall. Yuka and Misuzu sit outside to discuss a few things. At one point, Yuka asks Misuzu what happened in the final match. Misuzu tells her about the incident with her father, who was never happy with her, and Misao, a former member of Misuzu's clan, was banished because she learned another foreign technique, just like Misuzu did. She also mentions that she had fought with her father in the 4th matchup, but she made a mistake and stabbed him, which is also prohibited. Kakaru shows up and urges Misuzu to teach him how to wield the sword. Before Misuzu could say anything, Kakaru's right eye starts reacting, sending them to the Crimson Night again. Her people spot them coming, so they quickly dispatch themselves to go fight them. Misuzu, Kakaru, and Yuka come prepared as they slash, dice, and cut down all enemies in their way. As they clash swords, Misuzu buys Kakaru and Yuka some time to run away. However, one of the Black Knights catches them running and chases after them. The knight finds them hiding in the car they were hiding in and smashes it. Before he can deliver the final blow, someone else attacks and stops him. Misuzu has a hard time keeping up with Yura, the other Black Knight, and gets pinned down and almost taken out. Thankfully, someone else shows up to save her. Misuzu cuts out the knight and leaves him for dead. Kakaru opens his eyes shortly after their attacker leaves and finds his sister's ghost checking up on him. The group returns to the real world, where they find their new ally, Yuko-chan. We go to see the Inuyasha guy fighting demons in the Crimson Night before returning to the real world. In reality, he notices that time pauses anytime he's in the other reality. Yuko creates the Modern Society Studies Club and introduces its members, Misuzu, Yuka, and Kakaru, to the club. Kakaru wonders what could be happening to his sister, while Yuka calls him back to order and urges him to participate more in school activities. Inuyasha boy Aka Takahisa is in the nurse's office with bandages all over his arms. She asks him about skipping classes, but he shuts her up. He gets insulted by the nurse, who threatens to harm him. However, he gets the memo and scrams. The nurse chases after him, but she can't catch up. Meanwhile, Misuzu and the others discuss their encounter in the alternate dimension and discuss the Ally of Justice, a guide who saved her earlier. We find out that it's Takahisa, and he is eventually introduced to the group. They take him to the rooftop to ask him questions about their special abilities, but he refuses to join forces with them. Misuzu calls him an ill-mannered person, but Yuko tells her that he's a very kind person. Misuzu spars with Kakaru and beats him down in the first half of the fight. Kakaru gets back up and puts in more effort, but Misuzu stops him there and urges him to put his feelings into the sword and show his resolve. Kakaru then catches a glimpse of Misuzu's next move, which is to attack Yuka, and rushes towards her to save her. When he snaps back to reality, he finds out Misuzu is still standing. The following day, Kakaru walks Yuka to school and promises to always be there for her and all her endeavors. Along the way, they are interrupted by class clown Terry, who makes a mess, embarrassing himself as he walks alongside Momono and Kiori. After school, Kakaru meets with Misuzu on her way to the Modern Studies Club. Misuzu thinks about telling Kakaru about his powers, but she stops midway and gets to the room. There, they are transported to another world where they find Takahisa engaged in a battle to save himself. During their battle, Misuzu takes out her glasses and attacks the Black Knight, slashing him all over his body with her knives. When the Black Knight gets pissed, he catches Yukiko and throws her towards a wall. Yukiko realizes the danger Misuzu is in and rushes in for another attack, puncturing the Black Knight's head. Invidia, another Black Knight, shows up and stabs Yuko through her chest. After taking care of Yuko, she joins Ira, the Black Knight, to face the other students in front of them. Takahisa shows up and burns them up. It's time to return to the normal world, and Yuko is almost unharmed. She transforms back to her normal self after putting on her glasses and explains her hidden ability, which is an immortal and split personality. Yuka hugs Yukiko and remembers Takahisa's words to her, then turns and finds him trying to sneak off. She thanks them for accepting her and invites Takahisa to join the club when he feels like it. Kakeru is in training when he's told that Yuka faints in class. Kakeru rushes to the infirmary to check on Yuka, who is awake and able to talk to her. Yuka urges Kakeru not to worry too much about him, but instead to focus on getting things back to normal. Seiko-sensei, the nurse, is intrusive as usual, which I'm grateful for. I need no mushy feely scenes. Kakeru returns later to the infirmary to check on Yuka and help her prepare for class. Seiko-sensei asks Yuka why she's been getting little sleep recently, and Kakeru gets the tingling feeling of Crimson Night again. Seiko advises Kakaro to sing a lullaby the next time she has trouble sleeping. She begins to tell them she's done it before. Seiko tells them the importance of singing lullabies and shares her first meeting with Takahisa, a delinquent who stormed on her while she was being chased around by cops during her time as a motorbike gang enthusiast. She adopts Takahisa despite his ungrateful nature. This may look wholesome, but how the hell you adopt a street kid for absolutely no reason? Worst of all, you have street cred. You're just letting the child into the furnace. Misuzu and Kakeru catch up in the hallway, and Kakaro asks to continue training. Misuzu curses training and tells them to meet the last person. Takahisa is seen eating snacks, and Kakaro sits opposite him, hoping to get closer. However, Takahisa spites him by spilling a drink on his trousers. Misuzu shows up with their new member, a Class B student called Kukuri, who looks a lot like Kakeru's sister. They allow Kukuri to sit at their table so she can hear them explain the perks of their little group. We find out that Kukuri is mute. Kakeru and Yuka have a good time, and Takahisa discovers that there's a barrier preventing him from leaving the city. Kakaro asks Misuzu to teach him the sword, and Yuko takes Kukuri's clothes to the bathroom. Meanwhile, Kakeru and Mizuku train. She explains to him that he would have died if he stepped on the cloth that he didn't notice Misuzu kept on the floor. Misuzu instructs Kakaro to stop forgetting his surroundings and attacking blindly, teaching him the value of calmness. Kakeru and Yuka are transported back to the alternate dimension, where Invidia and Ira are present to stop them. Takahashi saves Yukiko from getting eaten in the bathroom. Kakeru encounters Ira, who shows little interest in Kakeru. He goes to try and kill Yuka in Kakeru's sight. Kakeru remembers the lesson of calmness and awakens his eye, which allows him to see the immediate future. He evades Ira's attacks until he finds his opening and erases Ira from reality. Lisette wakes up in her crystal and informs the demon boss about the awakening of the Invincible King's power, the Eye of An. Kakaro's nerve endings fail him, and he falls unconscious. In his unconscious state, Kakaro has a bad dream where he finds himself standing in a labyrinth full of dead bodies with the Invincible King Vard, who promises to bring war and strife to everything he knows. Kakeru's friends gather around him in the real world. Kakeru's nerves have been disrupted, so he's fighting for his life as the consequences of the Eye of An continue to wear down his body. Misuzu decides to save Kakeru by employing a cover healing method, stripping him naked and starting a ritual on him. Yuka, who is outside feeling sad, meets Kukuri, who gives her a hug. Misuzu recites an incantation to save Kakaro's life, causing a magic circle to form. Yuka becomes depressed and accuses herself of causing Kakaro's illness. She goes to where Yuka and Kakeru are the next morning and leaves food by the door. She peeps in just to see how Kakaro is doing and notices that Kakeru and Misuzu are dangerously close to one another and completely nude. Obviously, it's an anime, and we must have our couple's misunderstanding saga. After having a change of heart, Yuka heads back to the living room and finds Kakeru and Misuzu dangerously close to one another. Obviously, she runs away after this. Misuzu realizes that she only needed to strengthen Kakaro's capacity for self-regeneration, as his body took care of the rest. Yukiko then meets Kukuri, who jokes about her disheveled hair, and they discuss their behavior. Yukiko accompanies the others to school, where they discuss Verud, Kakeru, and the Eye of An. Verud was once the strongest person in the entire country, but he fell for a witch's tactics and allowed her to fool him into destroying his country. Misuzu has a flashback after hearing Yukiko's narrative and realizes that Lisette is also an immortal witch. Meanwhile, Kakeru catches up with Yuka on the roof, where she admits that she noticed Kakeru's change in attitude towards Misuzu in their naked scene. Kakeru says that nothing happened between them and that she's worried about the whole thing. Yuko and Misuzu talk about escaping the city, but Takahisa appears and informs them about the wall. Steiko interrupts them, but Takahisa acts disrespectfully again, so she drags him away by the ear. Yuka asks Kakeru to kiss her, but he refuses due to how he feels at the moment. As she runs away, they all experience another tingling sensation and are transported to a different dimension. Superbia has brought in Acedia, another Black Knight, and they beg him to promise them better this time. Idea uses his fire element and gets ready for an attack, but Misuzu is struck by it. When Kukuri suddenly appears, she uses her spirit chains to pierce and chop Acedia in pieces. A part of Acedia called Scholastica rises up and escapes. That's the scholarly element that supplied his life force. It leaves Invidia alone on the battlefield with Takahisa. Later on, Takahisa arrives to break the awful news that Invidia got away and Yuka might have been abducted. Kakeru asks where, and Takahisa replies to the infirmary. So Kakeru heads to the infirmary to save Yuka. Yuka runs by the infirmary, thinking about her last time with Kakeru. She screams horribly and drops to her knees. Exhausted from the heartbreak, dispelling light around. When Kakeru and the others arrive at the infirmary, they find it devastated and attempt to locate Yuka among the debris. Misuzu plans to divide the team, instructing Kakeru and Takahisa to hunt for Yuka at the school while checking other areas. They all fist bump. Lisette emerges from her never-ending sleep and looks around to make sure she's alone in the room. She detects a fissure in a crystal she was confined to and gradually grows the fracture. Kakeru stumbles a little as he frantically looks for Yuka across the school. Takahisa advises him not to be self-conscious and that he has made an attempt to ask Yukiko out previously. However, Yukiko's troubled past prevented her from accepting him. Takahisa acknowledges his fate when suddenly they are attacked in the classroom by some tiny demons. Takahisa vanquishes the demons and clears the path there. Meanwhile, Misuzu is observed to be getting closer and closer to the dimension's center. Invidia is called by Superbia to join them in the battle after he leaves. Yukiko finds Yuka in front of a temple, and they discuss something. Yuka laments her lack of authority, but Yukiko advises her not to worry too much about that kind of stuff. She then tries to make Yuka feel better, but when she realizes it won't work, she makes the decision to reveal her past to Yuka. For Yukiko, things could have been better. She had to live a life of conflict and battle as a child due to her immortality. She was used as a weapon of mass devastation in the Dravanian village. Yukiko felt she had no choice but to comply with demands and developed another personality that only emerged when she removed her glasses. Yuko begs Yuka to accept her rationality so that she doesn't become the same person she was when she was younger. When Yuka sees that Yukiko is telling the truth, she runs up to give her a tearful hug. However, it may seem something is wrong with Yuka. Arecia stops Lisette from escaping, and Superbia brings kills off, putting the hapless Black Knight in front of Takahisa and Kakeru. They fight Invidia until Superbia emerges from behind them and launches an attack. Kakeru receives one of Misuzu's swords just in time when she comes, giving them a stronger chance of beating Superbia and Invidia. Takahashi and Kakeru take on Invidia, while Misuzu takes on Super, who was revealed to know Misuzu's sword and sword style technique, even able to use the dual type technique, which adds a mystery of who these Black Knights are. Superbia eventually leaves the battlefield. With only Invidia to fight, she chooses to build a barrier that encloses Kakeru and everyone else while pressing the self-destruct button. It's shown that it's impossible to stop her in the barrier. As Invidia is about to blow herself up, Yuka appears from the top of the school building and awakens her power. She screams out another horrifying cry and releases a pink light that neutralizes the powers of Invidia's explosions and her teammates. Yukiko kills Invidia to stop her from doing any more damage. Yuka passes out in the building where she was, and a flashback depicts Lizette's grief at learning of her boyfriend, Verod's death in the Middle Ages. Avaricia and Superbia discuss the fragments in the opposite realm who are unaware of their identity after their encounter. Superbia tells Avaricia not to worry as she has a plan to stop them. Yuka wakes up the following morning and expresses happiness for being able to save everyone in the parallel dimension. She says that she will protect Kakeru, but Kakeru laughs it off. Misuzu and Kukuri discuss Yuka's whereabouts and abilities, and she leaves the room shortly after asking Kukuri to get her some tea. Takahisa asks Misuzu about Yuka's newly discovered power, which she worries might need to be used again in the future. She is left agitated by this and asks him to be on his watch. Kakeru meets Kukuri in the kitchen and asks her who she is and if she's the one who wrote the note to him in the library. She tried to explain but was not given the audience. She was about to show Kakeru a note telling him that she cannot recall her past memories. Yukiko breaks down in tears and declares her love for everyone, but Takahisa realizes that there are others like Siko who adore him and want the best for him. Kakeru and Misuzu convene at a nearby dojo to discuss the band Makel skill of Superbia, which was employed during her childhood. Misuzu also shares with Kakeru her recent discovery that is Superbia Misao, and it's plausible that Misao is Superbia, since time essentially stops in the other plane. She cuts her arm and offers the blood to Kakeru so he can inherit her family's powers. Yuka sees this as them getting into extreme freakiness and faints. I can't even say this with a straight face. I don't blame her though. Moving on, Kakeru starts to connect the dots, and a flashback is presented in which the witch Lizette calls her lover Verard's name while gazing at the moon with her shining white hair. The next morning, Takahisa meets up with his foster mother, who pulls him back to the infirmary. He apologizes after receiving criticism and requests her permission to go to his friend's house. Seiko starts to cry and think back on the past. In class, Tori does a love letter skit, which he launches towards Momono, who crushes it, humiliating the class clown Tori in front of everyone. She has a strange feeling shortly after and requests to go to the infirmary. Momono is granted her wish and goes outdoors, where she sees a black crow keeping watch over her. She annihilates the bird and moves on. Yuka awakens back at the dojo to the sound of wooden swords clashing in the inner chamber. Ultimately, Kakeru injures his senpai by giving her a blow to the forehead. Yuka hands her a tissue to wipe her blood, freaking everyone out by bending down and licking Misuzu's blood off her forehead. That, my boys, is what we call obsession. In the following scenario, Yuko visits Takahisa at school to express her regret for her prior actions. She begs her to stop defending herself and to take a sip of her drink, and she wishes they could stay that way forever. Meanwhile, the creepy nurse is in the background, but she's good. Misuzu and Kukure leave to find Yukiko, leaving Kakaro and Yuko alone in the house. Misuzu becomes inquisitive and queries Kukure about her previous involvement with Kakeru. Later on, while Yuka and Kakeru are cleaning the interim, Kakeru shields Yuka from a lizard and Yuka gives him a hug. It becomes super weird because she didn't want to let go, but then they hear a sound outside. Kakeru goes to investigate and finds out that it's Momono who confronts Kakeru and identifies herself as a warrior from the Holy Office of the Index, Ursula of the Epistle. She reveals that she was dispatched because Kakeru had released a demon. Takahisa and Yuko are discussing what to eat with Seiko as they go between school classes. They arrive at Seiko's office to find her lifeless body hanging upside down with 2 blades piercing her. Takahisa initially believes that reality is a prank, but when he finds Superbia making that nasty anime villain smile we all know and love next to the body, so he starts to believe it is genuine. Kakeru continues to question Momono's motivations. Momono lets go of her levitation magic and acknowledges that Kakaro has become a powerful force. As Yukiko keeps Superbia at bay, Takahisa loses control over his abilities. Superbia ensures Takahisa follows her as she moves the battle outside. Misuzu and Kukure think back on their last encounter in the other dimension, the time when Vidya attempted suicide. Misuzu understands how much the adversary wants them dead to occur right now, and they are putting their partnership to the test. She acknowledges that if they don't stick together, they'll surely die. Yukiko appears just as the city's emergency alert begins to sound, and Misuzu asks her what happened after observing her attitude. Superbia and Takahisa begin to demolish the city. When Kakeru asks what that means, Momono continues speaking in parables, informing Kakaro that he is the only one who can vanquish the evil he has awoken. Before Kakeru could respond, Momono notices a lizard watching them and blasts it off, saying that they've been compromised. All of a sudden, we see that the Black Knights have dispatched, having used the lizard to listen in on their talk. Superbia shows up at Misuzu's house, and she decides to act quickly to address Takahisa. Misuzu senses Superbia's presence and returns home in time to arm Kakaro and herself. Superbia summons Black Knights to balance the playing field once more, and Kakaro and his friends battle the Knights while Misuzu battles Superbia in human form. In the city, Yuko discovers Takahisa hurling fireballs at a Superbia illusion in the city, but it's too late to save the Owl City. Yukiko tries to stop his powers, but he's unable to stop. Something about a beast being an M that can't be controlled anymore. Why does this suddenly become a thing? He shoots at Yuko, purposefully missing her, and everyone is taken to the Crimson Knight. Momono enters the home and asks Yuko why she's just sitting in the room. She says it's because Kakeru told her to wait for her. Momono tells her that he's actually fighting the Black Knights outside, and she panics with an urge to leave. When she tries, Momono stops her, telling her Kakeru will be fine, though she's not sure of the others. Of course, Yuka doesn't care about the others. She's obsessed. Yuka tells her story about herself and Kakeru while drinking tea. Meanwhile, Kakeru uses his strength again and defeats the Asiya doll. Superbia seizes the opportunity to put an end to Misuzu while she's exhausted, but Kakeru blocks her blade from striking her with his lightning sword by using his sight to discern her next move. Superbia escapes and they return to the real world. Misuzu is brought back to the house by Kakeru to Momono, who tells them that the Black Knights they have been battling are actually the good guys sent by the Holy Office to fend off Lisette. Momono asks Misuzu for additional information about Superbia, but she buries her face in her hands and sobs, lamenting her lack of ability to defeat her. Yukiko comes in all bloodied up, saying that she killed Takahisa. Everyone is shocked. The students, including the witch Lisette, are preparing to defeat the Black Knights who are attempting to destroy the fragments of the Demon Stone of the Void. They have 7 different Demon Void stones embedded in their bodies, including Lisette. The problem lies in the combination of these stones, which would allow Lisette to regain her power. The Holy Office of the Index was created to prevent Lisette from wiping humanity out. Despite Takahisa's death, Lisette can still activate the Pitfall of Hades and destroy the world using Kakuro's Eye of Aeon. Misuzu shows huge concern about their chances in the battle. They are served tea by Yuka, and Misuzu noticed that there was a razor in hers. She quietly leaves the room, and Yuka asks Kakeru to sleep with her. Kakeru refuses at first, but because Momono says it's the only way she can continue explaining, Kakeru agrees, and they discuss Lisette and Verard's relationship, who, just realizing, looks like Dracula and his city is Dravonasia. Well, one betrayal after another led to his death, which also led to Lisette's desire to destroy the world. The Holy Knights were present to stop her, and they sacrificed themselves to save humanity. Momono explains that the Black Knights are intent on killing Kakeru because they fear he isn't strong enough to control the Eye of Aeon when the power awakens. Momono admits to being sent to kill Kakeru, but she changes her mind after seeing the world and people striving to make something of themselves. Kakeru visits Yukiko, but doesn't eventually meet her. He also meets Kukuri on the way and reconciles with her. Kakeru visits Misuzu in her dojo, and she reveals her feelings of powerlessness when facing Mizuo. She thanks Kakeru for helping her and cries softly. They return to the living room, where Yuka finds her, and Yukiko reveals her love for Takahisa. Momono explains the concept of forbidden magic used to divide and seal Lisette's power, which caused her power to be broken into 7 fragments sent to 7 different parallel dimensions. These fragments were summoned into the Crimson Night and returned to the same world. Yuka takes Misuzu away and tries to kiss Kakeru. They do, but are soon teleported to another dimension. Misuzu searches Yukiko's room but finds out she's gone alone to the Crystal Tower. Everyone leaves except Kakeru and Yuka. Kakeru tries to fight when demons appear, but he has no weapon. Yuka uses her power to stop demons, but she faints. Kakeru searches for her, but Yukiko gets caught in Superbia's trap and is left for dead. Superbia realizes she can heal herself with her fragmented stone, leaving her in a puddle of blood. Kakeru sees this and attacks in senseless rage during the battle. Momono attacks Superbia with her powers, but Avarisha blocks it, losing an arm in the process. Because of the impact of the attack, Superbia loses the green gemstone, which Yuka picked up. I guess we know how that went. Lisette recovers her power and sees Yuka grinning and praising her stars for setting the witch free. Kakeru sees into the future with his eye and witnesses Yuka being wounded by Lisette. He tries to save Yuka, but it is too late, as his sword isn't strong enough to defend against the attack. The attack eventually broke the sword and hit Yuka, leaving her unconscious. Lisette tries to seize the last few void stones in Ion's eye, but Avarisha refuses to let it happen. Kakeru and Misuzu show up in a barren area of the city, and Misuzu tells Kakeru to keep his head on straight. They decide to ascertain Yuka's continued existence and meet Kakeru's friends Tadashi and Kori. The battle between the witch and humanity's only hope is what follows. Avarisha turns into a dragon who lashes out fireballs, but Lisette blocks the attack. Misuzu and Kakeru get together at the school to discuss tactics, and Kakeru is cautioned not to act too carelessly because Lisette could still use his eye to open up the door to Hades. In the Red Night, Lisette tries to take Momono's fragment from her, but Ayad, the guardian angel of Kakeru's sister, enters the battle and stops her. Lisette greets her as a new member of the team and is ready to take on all 3 of them at once. As they reach the top of the tower, Superbia traps Lisette, putting her squarely in the line of Avarisha's flame. Avarisha unleashes a massive fireball that impacts Superbia and Lisette, causing excruciating pain. Kakeru begins to doubt their chances of victory over Lisette. Misuzu has an epiphany that allows 2 individuals with cuss blood to unite through intercourse, but Kakeru cannot betray Yuka in such a way. He withdraws and says he won't do it, but Misuzu grows closer to him and swears to die for him in her next battle. Misuzu and Kakeru engage in a romantic ritual, while Nude and Misao delivers the awful news that Avarisha has passed away. She informs them that Lisette is en route to retrieve Ion's eye, and that Momono committed suicide. Yuka meets Kakeru and manipulates her into approaching her, but it's already too late. Lisette gives Kakeru a hug and stabs him with her sword, glad to see her Verard again, and wants to keep an eye on herself. Verard and the witch Lisette are shown looking out of a building at their burning land in a flashback to the Middle Ages. Lisette seizes Ayan's eye and starts destroying the entire universe. Just as the world is about to end completely, Kakeru stops predicting with the Eye of Ayan and realizes that everything that happened was a projection of his future self. When Lisette is about to kill Yuka, Kakeru sees everything that happened in the previous episode as a premonition. He sees it all at the moment when Lisette is revived. In an attempt to prevent the witch from gaining another fragment, Avariccia protects Yuka from Shiori's attack, while Kakeru hesitates over this conclusion. Kakeru makes the decision to take his own life in order to stop Lieselot from stealing his eye after realizing that she cannot finish her quest without the Eye of Ayan, no matter how many fragments she collects. Then he recalls every moment of his early years and realizes how much Yuka had shielded him. The first scene was during Christmas time when he was reading a book about a prince and a princess, which ended with them both living happily ever after. Yuka comes in and asks him what he's reading. He tells her that he likes the ending and she agrees. The second was when Kakeru was in school. They had filled the shoes in his locker with pins. People laughed at him and called him weird, but when Yuka came to his aid and said they should go home together. The third scene is when Kakeru's sister sees Yuka all bruised up in front of their door. She asks her what's wrong and she says nothing. Kakeru opened the door and she asked if he wanted to go to the park. He says no, so she enters the room and asks to play with him indoors. The last scene was after Kakeru's sister had committed the suicide. Yuka made rice balls to comfort him, but he threw them away and started crying. Yuka hugged him. I think the gist is to redeem Yuka from all the vices she has done throughout the story. I wonder if anyone will buy it. I don't. Anyway, in the hospital, he awoke and questioned his survival. When Yuka cut his throat, the sword became useless and Lieselot was unable to fight because of Yuka's strength. Instead, Yuka passed out from weariness and is currently resting in a bed close to Kakeru. Kakeru decides he will stop at nothing to help Yuka. Misuzu looks away, disappointed that she is unable to tell him how much she loves him. Kukuri's ghost, Abraxas, is presented to Kakeru. We find out that she had killed Kakeru and committed suicide out of fear of Lisette getting the Eye of Ayan. But it's strange because Kakeru is still alive. Momono explains that the reason for him being alive is because he's not in the same realm as Kukuri. He's a Kakeru that's dragged into Yuka's world via her subconscious. Because of this, Kukuri didn't kill the right Kakeru, or better still, killed herself in vain. After talking about how Abraxas killed Kakeru in a different world and why she is still alive, Yuka gets absorbed by the bed, and the group goes through the roof. Lieselot is sealing Yuka in anticipation of the approaching Black Moon to prevent further nullification. Because of the threat of losing Yuka, he submits to Lisette, who licks his eye and eye to open the gates. The Black Knights, though, are a step ahead. They are able to hold Lisette off for a few moments. Abraxas brings Shiori's fragment to Kakeru, telling him he may transport Lieselot to a space-time gap with the fragment and the Eye of Ayan. Then they both vanish. Lisette breaks free and Misuzu shields Kakeru with the outlaw Dujikiri Yasatsuna with assistance from Misao. Kakeru spits out some anime protagonist talk, and Verard makes an appearance in Lieselot's thoughts and says that destroying the planet would be foolish. Lieselot feels she's still certain after wiping out the planet. Lieselot unleashes strength, which Misuzu and Misao counter, and then she vanishes. With the Eye of Ayan, Kakeru could see where Lieselot would appear, so he used the fragment to seal her. When Lieselot attempted to run, Avariccia seized hold of her. She was rendered helpless when they were both trapped in the space-time fissure. As the Crimson Night begins to crumble, Misao thanks them and leads them out of there. After that, they arrive in a world of peace. Only Kakeru, Yuka, and Misuzu are aware of every detail surrounding the Red Knight in this universe. Yukiko and Takahisa are alive, but they don't know about Yuka, Kakeru, or the Crimson Knight. Seika was also alive. When Misuzu asks them to travel with Ayana's, the story comes to an end. Using his Eye of Ayan, Kakeru discovers that the Black Moon is still visible, which may be an allusion to a sequel. Akaret on John Holnap, which translates to "Will you come tomorrow?" marks the conclusion and may also allude to a follow-up.